Hello and welcome. This is the third video in this series. After watching this video lesson, you will have gained a better understanding of how exiled parts of your subconscious were created after experiences of abuse. The video content and information is heavily influenced by the internal family systems model of therapy. My name is James Fitzgerald. I'm a Vermont state licensed clinical mental health counselor. Before the lesson begins, I am ethically obligated to share some information with you about the video's material and content. This video is meant to be educational. It should not be considered mental health care or treatment. By continuing to watch the video, you agree to hold me harmless and will make no claims against me based on your use of this video to make any related health care or life-changing decisions. The videos were created for the exclusive use of my clients in therapy or coaching, but they are published in the public domain. The video you're watching and the media and images presented in it were generated by AI software. I made the conscious decision to ask the AI to present media and images of calm and serene scenes. The information in the videos was gathered by me from reliable sources and written with the assistance of an AI chatbot, and any similarities to published work is accidental. The voice of the narrator in the video is mine, but it is a simulation, and I provided my permission for the AI video generator software to use it. If you continue viewing this video, it constitutes your acknowledgement that you have read and agree to the terms and conditions of use, liability waiver, and ethical and legal disclaimers. Before you watch this video, please watch the introductory video about Exile's experiences and the video on the self. I also want to quickly mention a few things about the words I use. Words have power. In describing people's experience at some points in the video, I have intentionally decided to use the word survivor instead of victim. I've done this for a multitude of reasons that are outside the scope of this video. In this video, we'll explore what happens within your internal system and self that causes certain parts to become exiled and burdened with pain. In this video lesson, we'll be learning about the different types of abuse. During some of the discussion, I will be explaining the ideas through a clinical interpretation that could be perceived by some as pathologizing the human experience. My intent is to share my perspective of how several theories of psychology intersect with the IFS model of therapy. As you watch this video, please be cautious and vigilant because exiles may be triggered and the protective parts of your system may become activated. If the exile's emotions and the protector's reactions become overwhelming, please stop the video, take a break, and talk to someone. I encourage you to seek immediate professional help if it is needed. If you are my client, we can discuss the experience in our next session. Let's take a moment to discern the information I am about to share with you. What is abuse? Abuse, the way we're going to discuss it in this lesson, is described as a misuse of power intended to harm or control another person. Abuse can leave psychological wounds that can be harder to heal than bodily injuries. In the IFS perspective, experiences of abuse manifest as parts of our subconscious that continue to cry out to our conscious self for support, love, and affection. Survivors of abuse may have intense negative feelings long after the abuse has ended, which are held by exiles. Anxiety, flashbacks, and trust issues are common in people who have experienced abuse, which are expressed by protective parts of our subconscious. Abuse can impact a person's ability to form relationships and find happiness when protective parts act in extreme ways. Abuse can be classified by its form or by its context. Let's review some of the different types of abuse. including physical, sexual, psychological, emotional, and financial. Keep in mind that everyone's experiences, interactions, and relationships are different. This video cannot hope to cover all the different types of abuse and the specific ways in which it was experienced. I invite you to read more about it to expand your objective perspective on it. You can find helpful, informative, reliable, and accurate information online at websites like Good Therapy, Counseling Today, Psychology Today, Better Health, WebMD, and many others. The first type of abuse I'll be talking about is physical abuse. Physical abuse may bring immediate harm to someone, but its effects can also be long-lasting. A person who has experienced physical abuse, especially in childhood, may be more likely to experience emotional and psychological difficulties later in life. Those who have survived domestic violence, an abusive relationship, or other abuse in adulthood may also experience distress related to the effects of abuse long after it has stopped. The support of a therapist or other mental health professional can often help an individual recover from these effects. Physical abuse can take many forms, and anyone can be a victim of abuse, regardless of age, sex, gender, race, or financial status. Children are often more likely to experience abuse at the hands of a parent, caretaker, or sibling, while an adult might be physically abused by a stranger, spouse, partner, acquaintance, peer, or significant other. Abuse and mistreatment or neglect of an elderly or vulnerable adult is often perpetrated by a caretaker, who might be a paid professional or a family member. Those in positions of power might also physically abuse individuals in their care. While physical abuse may be considered by some only to be abuse when physical harm is the result, many types of behaviors are in fact abusive. In general, an individual who brings unwanted physical harm to an intimate partner, child, or elder may be considered to be abusing that person. These actions may also be defined as assault. This type of abuse could also include behaviors such as slapping, punching, shoving, whipping, spanking, or caning. It also includes actions which cause illness or disability, such as poisoning or medical care neglect. Now let's review a profoundly important and sensitive topic, sexual abuse. I'm going to spend a bit more time on this subject due to its serious and sensitive nature. The goal of this next part of today's lesson is to shed light on the different types of sexual abuse, explore the challenges survivors face in reporting it, discuss the long-term effects, and highlight pathways to healing, including the transformative power of internal family systems therapy. Sexual abuse encompasses a range of non-consensual sexual activities imposed upon an individual. It's crucial to recognize that abuse isn't limited to physical acts. It can also be psychological or emotional. Here are some of the different types. Child sexual abuse involves engaging a minor in sexual activities. This includes not only physical contact, but also exposure to inappropriate content or conversations. Rape and sexual assault consists of any sexual act performed without explicit consent. This can occur between strangers, acquaintances, or even within marriages and relationships. Incest involves sexual activities between family members who are not legally permitted to marry. Sexual harassment means unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, or other verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature, often occurring in workplaces or educational settings. Exploitation and trafficking includes forcing or manipulating someone into sexual activities for profit or personal gain. Most sexual abuse experts agree sexual abuse is never only about sex. Instead, it is often an attempt to gain power over others. Immediate crisis assistance after sexual assault can prove invaluable and even save lives. A person can report sexual assault by calling local police. Survivors may also wish to get a physical exam at a hospital. There are over 433,000 cases of sexual assault or rape annually in the U.S. among people ages 12 and older, according to the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. Every 68 seconds, another American is sexually assaulted, the data shows. The majority of sexual assaults are not reported to police. According to the Department of Justice, only 310 out of every 1,000 sexual assaults are reported to the police. That means more than 2 out of 3 go unreported, with many survivors choosing not to report because they feared retaliation, believed the police would not do anything to help, or for other reasons. However, 98.8% of sexual abuse offenders were sentenced to prison, according to the United States Sentencing Commission. Many survivors grapple with the decision to report their abuse. Several factors contribute to this fear. One of those factors is the feeling of shame and guilt. Survivors may unjustly blame themselves for the abuse. Another factor is the fear of not being believed. Survivors may worry about skepticism from authorities, friends, or family. Another factor is the fear of retaliation. They may have concerns about potential backlash from the abuser, especially if they hold power over the survivor. Another factor is stigma. Societal judgments can discourage survivors from coming forward. The last factor for this discussion is emotional readiness. Sometimes the trauma may be too overwhelming to recount immediately. The survivor may have repressed the short-term memory and thus formed an exiled subconscious part. The impact of sexual abuse can ripple through every aspect of a survivor's life. The survivor may have emotional and psychological trauma. Anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and feelings of worthlessness. The survivor may experience long-term physical health issues, chronic pain, gastrointestinal disorders, and other stress-related ailments. The survivor may experience relationship challenges, difficulty trusting others, intimacy issues, and challenges in forming healthy relationships. The survivor may engage in self-destructive behaviors. The mechanisms of substance abuse, self-harming, risk-taking behavior, or control of food might be used as self-soothing, self-medicating, numbing, or coping by protective parts of our psyche. Help is available. Acknowledging the need for help is an extremely courageous first step toward healing. Here's how survivors can begin their journey. Survivors can reach out to trusted individuals. This could be friends, family members, or mentors who can offer support. If an event or experience occurred in the workplace, it is up to the survivor to decide whether they would want to address it first in the workplace setting. Any discussion of a survivor's choice of reporting it to their coworkers or supervisors is outside the scope of this video and lesson. Survivors can try to seek professional help. Therapists, psychologists, clinical social workers, marriage and family therapists, and mental health counselors with specialized training in trauma-informed care can provide individualized and person-centered assistance. Survivors can ask to receive medical attention from medical professionals at a hospital, clinic, or physician's office. They can address any physical injuries or concerns with healthcare professionals. Survivors can find and retain legal assistance, and some attorneys do take pro bono clients. Understanding their legal rights can empower survivors, whether they choose to report immediately or report later. Many states have resources available for abuse survivors. For instance, the Vermont Department of Health provides them on their website. If you read the video description, you'll find links to resources in addition to the list of references and works cited. Healing can occur through support groups and therapy, whether the events and experiences were reported or went unreported. No one should navigate this journey alone. Support groups offer a safe space to share experiences with others who understand. Therapy provides tools to process trauma and rebuild one's life. Different therapeutic approaches can be beneficial. It's important that you find a professional that you relate to and fit with while using an approach that resonates with you. The method I use is informed by an integrated approach to internal family systems therapy. IFS therapy is a compassionate and non-pathologizing approach that views the mind as a system of sub-personalities or parts, each with its own perspective and qualities. Here's how it aids in healing. First, identify your parts. Recognizing the different parts affected by the trauma, such as the wounded child or the protective critic. Second, improve and strengthen the self's leadership abilities. Cultivating a core sense of self that is calm, compassionate, and curious. Third, develop cooperative healing relationships within your internal system of parts. Facilitating dialogue between parts to understand their roles and alleviate internal conflicts. Fourth, integrate your experiences. Helping parts release extreme roles and burdens carried since the abuse, leading to inner harmony. Healing from sexual abuse is a deeply personal journey that looks different for everyone. Remember, the abuse was not your fault, and you deserve support, understanding, and healing. By acknowledging the pain, seeking help, and utilizing therapies like IFS, it's possible to reclaim your life and move forward with strength and resilience. Now let's turn our attention to the invisible scars of emotional and/or psychological abuse, which are defined as chronic patterns of manipulation to control another person. Emotional abuse is a form of manipulation used to maintain control in a relationship. This type of abuse may include verbal attacks, humiliation, intimidation, bullying, and isolation. It can cause deep emotional harm that may last for years. Abuse is often defined as threatening behavior designed to subjugate another human being. Emotional abuse uses negative feelings like fear, guilt, and shame to control a person. Common tactics include insults, threats, coercion, and criticism. A person may also use invalidating, manipulation, controlling behavior, and gaslighting to make a target doubt their own memories. Emotional abuse can overlap with physical and sexual abuse, or it can appear on its own. In some relationships, partners might emotionally abuse each other. In other relationships, the abuse goes one way. Abuse may wax and wane, being more frequent or intense at some times and less intense during other periods. Emotional abuse can be difficult to identify if it is not blatant. In a 2019 meta-analysis on psychological abuse and mental health published in Systematic Reviews, researchers found that psychological violence is estimated to be the most prevalent form of intimate partner violence. Yet, there is very little research on the individual impact of psychological abuse on mental health. Some people excuse their abuser's behavior, blaming it on a bad mood. Since emotional abuse often causes low self-esteem, the person may think they deserve their poor treatment. If someone experiences gaslighting, they may even believe they imagined the abuse. A person's behavior may fall into the category of emotional abuse when the behavior does not stop or even pause when the recipient begins crying or asks for time to cool down. In fact, abuse may escalate as the recipient of the abuse becomes more vulnerable and upset. The behavior may be considered emotional abuse when it is frequent, occurring several times a month or more. The behavior may be considered abuse if the person uses vulgar and demeaning language, or they make baseless accusations. It may be emotional abuse if arguments are one-sided, where one person does all the talking and never listens, if the person threatens violence, if they do not apologize after engaging in abusive behavior. The behavior may be considered emotional abuse when the person who is abusive will not recognize the validity of anything their victim says. The behavior may be considered emotional abuse when sexual abuse or physical abuse is also present. It is important to note that behavior may be abusive even if none of these factors are recognized. However, if any of these factors are present on more than the rarest of occasions, emotional abuse may be taking place. Historically, psychological and emotional abuse has been widely overlooked, despite the staggering statistics. The National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey 2010 summary report reported that approximately half of Americans had experienced emotional abuse by a partner in their lifetime. In addition, they found that psychological abuse causes long-term damage to a victim's mental health, and that subtle psychological abuse is more harmful than overt psychological abuse or direct aggression. These findings indicate the urgency to educate clinicians on how to accurately identify psychological abuse and power imbalances in a relationship, particularly when the more overt forms of abuse are not present. Furthermore, victims of psychological abuse often do not know that they are experiencing abuse. Even though research has repeatedly shown that there is a strong link between psychological abuse alone and a range of mental health disorders and physical conditions, such as post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, irritable bowel syndrome, gynecological problems, chronic pain, substance use, physical injury, and sleep disturbances. In fact, an article published in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence in 2006 and an article published in Violence Against Women in 2008 both found that psychological abuse is a stronger predictor of post-traumatic stress disorder than physical abuse among women. If clinicians are not sufficiently trained in psychological abuse, then this population will lack adequate support, or even worse, abuse victims may be further victimized by the untrained therapist, particularly in couples therapy. Now let's turn our attention to the damaging and life-altering experience of financial abuse. Financial abuse involves the misuse of money or economic assets to harm, control, or manipulate another person. It's more common than many realize. Studies indicate that it occurs in the vast majority of domestic violence cases, up to 99%. They may take over one's bank account or steal one's identity to rack up debt. Selling or taking one's property without permission also counts as abuse. When someone's access to financial resources is restricted or eliminated, it can trap them in unhealthy or dangerous situations. The fear of poverty or homelessness can make leaving an abusive relationship seem impossible, and if you have children, it adds another layer of complexity. Like other forms of abuse, financial control can lead to feelings of isolation and hopelessness. Even after escaping such a situation, the emotional scars can last for years. Professional support from licensed therapists can be invaluable in helping individuals recognize abuse, access resources, and heal from trauma. In our society, money is essential for basic needs like food, shelter, and health care. Financial abuse occurs when someone prevents another person from accessing or earning money independently, forcing them into dependency. Following are some different forms of financial abuse: exploiting someone's resources and forcing someone to hand over their earnings, credit cards, or benefits. Coercing free labor without compensation, such as pressuring a partner to work in a family business for free. Restricting access to funds by convincing someone to share a bank account, then draining it or changing passwords. Destroying property that could be sold for money. Providing a controlled allowance to monitor and limit purchases. Sabotaging someone's employment by pressuring someone to quit their job. Interfering with their work through harassment or causing them to miss work by injury. Taking away transportation or refusing to share transportation to prevent them from going to work. Coerce debt by using someone's identity to accumulate debt without their consent. Forcing them to apply for loans or credit cards, then leaving the debts unpaid, which damages their credit score. Financial abuse is often intertwined with other abusive behaviors. It's a tool for control, making it harder for victims to leave due to financial dependency. Anyone can experience financial abuse, but certain groups are more vulnerable. One such group is women. Societal norms in some cultures still promote financial dependency for women. Another group is marginalized communities. Immigrants, LGBTQ individuals, and people with disabilities often face employment discrimination, making financial independence more challenging. Another group are parents with young children. The well-being of their children can make them endure abusive situations. And lastly, elderly individuals are susceptible to financial abuse. Cognitive impairments can make older adults vulnerable to exploitation. It's crucial to understand that victims are not to blame. Trusting a loved one with financial matters doesn't make someone gullible or at fault. Financial abuse often starts subtly, with gestures that seem caring, like offering to handle the bills. Over time, the abuser tightens control, criticizing spending habits, restricting access to money, and making unilateral financial decisions. Victims may start to believe negative statements about their ability to manage finances, making them more compliant. Abusers might not recognize their actions as harmful. They may rationalize their behavior due to resentment, insecurity, or a misguided sense of entitlement. However, these feelings do not justify the abuse or lessen its impact. If you or someone you know is experiencing these forms of control, you can reach out to trusted friends, family, or professional organizations dedicated to helping abuse victims. Abuse can occur within any kind of relationship, whether familial, professional, or social. It can also occur between strangers, although this pattern tends to be rarer. Some of the more common contexts where abuse occurs include the following: intimate partner violence or any form of abuse which occurs in an intimate relationship should be taken seriously and may be criminal. The relationship can be straight, homosexual, monogamous, polyamorous, and so on. In the United States alone, an average of 20,000 phone calls are placed to domestic violence hotlines each day. Elderly and vulnerable adult abuse is when someone harms, exploits, or neglects an elderly person or vulnerable adult. The abuser is often someone in charge of the individual's care, such as a family member or nursing home worker. In the United States, roughly 1 in 10 Americans over age 60 have experienced elder abuse. Child abuse is when someone harms, exploits, or neglects a minor under 18. Estimates say 1 in 4 American kids have experienced neglect or abuse at some point. Ritual abuse is when systemic maltreatment occurs as part of a ritual. In the 1980s and 1990s, there were widespread accusations of satanic cults abusing American children. Most of these cases were disproven. There are records of ritual abuse occurring among cults such as the Branch Davidians. Yet ritual abuse is not as common as popular culture or mainstream news outlets or social media would suggest. I do not mean to invalidate anyone's experience, and I'm not saying that your abuse never happened. I am just sharing that it is extremely rare. A person can experience more than one type of abuse. For instance, someone who is psychologically abused may experience financial, physical, and sexual abuse at the same time. In fact, psychological abuse and financial abuse are often precursors to physical violence. Abuse in any form or context can harm an individual mentally, intellectually, physically, and/or emotionally. Even after the abuse has stopped, the survivors can still experience distress. Abuse survivors have a higher risk of mental health concerns and higher risk of poor physical health. Abuse survivors may experience one or more of the following issues. They might live with anxiety. Survivors may be afraid of people or situations that remind them of their abuse experiences. They may be fearful of strangers, solitude, or sexual intimacy, depending on the nature of the abuse. Anxiety symptoms such as inappropriate and excessive worry, disrupted sleep, or panic attacks are common in survivors of abuse. They may have difficulty managing anger. Survivors of abuse may feel intense anger at their abusers. They may resent bystanders who knew of the abuse and failed to intervene. They might even be mad at themselves for being abused, believing they could or should have stopped it. Anger is a natural response to being abused. Survivors can learn to manage their anger in a constructive manner that will promote healing. They may suffer from depression. Fatigue, lethargy, and chronic pain are common. Feelings of hopelessness, sadness, or emptiness are common among people who have experienced abuse. They may experience anhedonia and struggle to enjoy activities they used to like, especially if those activities remind them of the abuser. They may become suicidal, both passive and active thoughts of ending the pain by ending their life. They may experience episodes of dissociation. Numbness, confusion, and out-of-body experiences may occur during or after abuse. Dissociation can help the person avoid the pain and fear associated with abuse. In rare cases, memories of abuse may be repressed. Some survivors may not have any conscious memory of the abuse. They may have compartmentalized their life events, experiences, and painful memories. They may exhibit cycling mood issues. Irritability and mood swings affect many survivors of abuse. Survivors may display different types of attachment styles and express different personality traits. They may be suffering with post-traumatic stress or PTSD. Nightmares, hypervigilance, flashbacks, avoidance, irritability, panic attacks, and other symptoms of PTSD may occur. Survivors are likely to avoid certain settings and situations that remind them of the abuse. Survivors often experience guilt and shame. The individual may believe they deserved the abuse, asked for it, were responsible for it, or failed to stop it. Challenging these beliefs in therapy can help survivors of abuse transform these feelings. Self-destructive and self-sabotaging behavior can take many forms. Some survivors will self-medicate with drugs or alcohol. Others might engage in self-harm, such as hitting, burning, biting, or cutting themselves. People may neglect their personal hygiene or sabotage any potential for success. These behaviors often indicate low self-esteem and lack of confidence, a deficit in self-energy. They may have learned to mistrust or distrust others. They may refuse to allow themselves to be vulnerable. Learning to trust others after abuse has occurred can be challenging. Someone who has experienced abuse may struggle with physical intimacy. While abuse can lead to mental health concerns, not every case results in extreme distress. The stress and consequences of the trauma can worsen the symptoms and behaviors of pre-existing conditions, such as neurodevelopmental, neurocognitive, schizophrenic and psychotic, mood, and intellectual disorders. The severity of the consequences can depend on the situation and the individual. For instance, someone may feel differently about abuse from a parent and abuse from a stranger. Whether loved ones, family, and friends recognized or dismissed the abuse can have a large impact. Demographic factors and genetics can also affect how someone responds to abuse. For example, someone during childhood is more likely to develop mental health concerns. Gender roles and cultural norms can influence how one responds to sexual abuse. Socioeconomic status may decide whether someone receives adequate attention and treatment. People who were abused as children are more likely to have psychological and legal concerns as adults. One study found 80% of 21-year-olds who had experienced child abuse met the criteria for a mental illness diagnosis. Survivors of child abuse are 1.5 times more likely to abuse drugs in adulthood. Child abuse increases the likelihood of adult criminal behavior by 28%. A U.S. Department of Justice study in 1999 found prison inmates were twice as likely to have been abused as children as the general public. Child abuse can create a ripple effect that touches every part of a child's life. It can hinder a child's academic performance and social skills. Missing developmental milestones can have a domino effect on a child's well-being. A 2014 study showed child abuse can affect nerve growth in young brains. The impact of child abuse can last a lifetime. Make no mistake in understanding this. Unless the individual is so cognitively or intellectually disabled, they lack the mental capacity or regulation ability to manage reactions and behaviors. Abuse is a choice the perpetrator makes. There are many factors which can make a person more likely to abuse others. Yet, it is important to remember these influences do not cause abuse. They merely explain the harmful and destructive behavior. Someone who engages in abuse often has power over their target, intimidating them into silent compliance. This power could be social status, physical strength, wealth, or another form of influence. Due to their relative power, an abuser may feel entitled to treat the other person how they wish. Some people abuse others to compensate for a lack of agency elsewhere in their lives. For instance, an adult who was fired from their job may lash out at their spouse to relieve stress. Narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, low self-esteem, insecurity, inadequacy, worthlessness, lack of confidence, deficits in emotional regulation skills, and anger management issues are common among abusers. They might try to control or manipulate an individual to prevent the person from leaving the relationships, thereby abandoning them. Severe mental illness, brain health issues, cognitive abilities, intelligence, and socioeconomic status can also play a role in abuse. Depression, childhood trauma, anxiety, PTSD, and/or substance abuse are also common among abusers. The perpetrator's victims may also have pre-existing neurodevelopmental disorders, medical conditions, trauma and stressor disorders, anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, personality disorders, severe mental illness, eating and elimination disorders, and/or substance use disorders. Not everyone who has these conditions will abuse others, but the diagnoses are relatively common among abusers. Yet the largest predictor of abusive behavior is whether the perpetrator was abused themselves. Someone who was mistreated as a child may mimic the abusive behaviors of their caregivers. They may try to project the power they are missing in the feelings of powerlessness. Instead of learning conflict resolution, civil discourse, and communication skills to negotiate or share, a person may only know how to use violence, manipulation, coercion, aggression, force, and intimidation to get their way. Some abusers may not even realize their behavior is unusual because it was normalized in their past. a part of their culture or subculture, and or they are desensitized to it. In understanding abuse and its impact on survivors, particularly through the lens of internal family systems therapy, it's important to dismantle some of the deeply ingrained misconceptions that cloud the issue. These misconceptions contribute to social stigmas that often prevent survivors from recognizing what's happening in their relationships, and they can also stop them from seeking help. One of the most prevalent misunderstandings is that abuse only affects marginalized groups, people living in poverty, or oppressed groups. This is far from the truth. Abuse transcends religious, political, socioeconomic, cultural, and racial boundaries. Another common fallacy is the belief that abuse is solely physical or sexual, when in fact it can take many forms, including psychological and emotional abuse. There's also the dangerous idea that both parties are equally responsible for the abuse, which minimizes the harm inflicted by the abuser. Finally, a widespread misconception is that victims of abuse are simply returning to abusive dynamics from childhood. While this is sometimes the case, it's certainly not a universal pattern, and it's not a helpful way of thinking about it. A significant stereotype involves the way victims of abuse are perceived and portrayed. Many assume that a person enduring abuse will outwardly appear meek or timid, making them easy to identify. But in reality, many survivors are anything but. Victims often present as strong, educated, financially successful, and independent. They can be leaders in their fields or top performers at work, with the outside world having no clue that behind closed doors, they're being subjected to relentless criticism, surveillance, threats, and isolation from their support systems. This is why it's crucial for social workers, doctors, nurses, counselors, and other health professionals to be mindful of their own beliefs and bias about abuse. If they hold these limiting views, they might overlook key indicators of what their clients and patients are experiencing. One particular area where awareness needs to be heightened is regarding male victims of psychological abuse. Society tends to overlook men as potential victims, even though statistics show that nearly half of both men and women in the U.S. have experienced psychological aggression by an intimate partner. Many men struggle to recognize their situation as abuse, often because they're confused, ashamed, or convinced that they are at fault. Cultural norms around masculinity exacerbate this, with men expected to be assertive and capable of standing up for themselves. Many boys and men who grow up being taught to respect women may misinterpret this as needing to tolerate mistreatment without setting boundaries, which can leave them vulnerable to abuse. Traits like compassion, empathy, vulnerability, emotional sensitivity, and a sense of responsibility, qualities often viewed as positive, can actually make it more difficult for men to recognize they are being mistreated, and can increase the likelihood that they'll remain in toxic and unhealthy relationships. For those enduring psychological abuse, the term abuse itself can be difficult to accept, particularly when physical violence is absent. Mental health professionals play a pivotal role in helping clients identify this dynamic. If a client isn't ready to label their experience as abuse, using terms like bullying within the context of their relationship can be a gentler way of helping them come to terms with the reality of their situation. Often victims of abuse are burdened with deep shame. Shame for not recognizing the signs earlier, not leaving sooner, or believing that they somehow caused the abuse. Survivors may also feel guilt for having acted in ways they wouldn't have otherwise, had they not been coerced or threatened. Counseling interventions are vital here, including abuse education, trauma recovery, and rebuilding self-esteem. Additionally, helping clients develop supportive relationships outside of their abusive dynamic can be essential for their healing and recovery. Understanding the internal parts that develop in response to abuse is crucial within IFS therapy. For survivors, various parts of the psyche take on roles to protect them from the trauma. whether through minimizing the abuse, denying it, or taking responsibility for it. Counselors working with abuse survivors using IFS can help clients identify and unburden these parts, enabling them to step into a fuller, more integrated sense of self. Let's take a non-pathologizing stance. Surviving abuse often leaves deep psychological scars, physical scars, and financial insecurity that manifests in complex and multifaceted ways. It can be extremely difficult for the victims of abusers to leave their situation and end the relationship for a variety of reasons that are outside the scope of this video. IFS provides insight into these internal complexities and offers a compassionate framework for understanding how individuals compartmentalize traumatic experiences through the formation of exiles and protectors. The next section of this lesson explores the connection between surviving abuse and the development of these internal parts, shedding light on the path toward healing. IFS conceptualizes the mind as an internal family of distinct parts, each with its own perspectives, feelings, and roles. Rather than viewing the psyche as a single mind, monolithic entity, IFS recognizes the multiplicity of the mind. This approach allows for a more nuanced and natural understanding of internal conflicts and emotional struggles. We all may have used the IFS language and concepts without realizing it. Whenever you say, a part of me needs something. A part of me wants to do something. A part of me thinks that is inaccurate. A part of me feels like eating the candy. A part of me wants to act responsibly. In the context of abuse, exiles are the parts that hold the painful beliefs, memories, emotions, and sensations associated with traumatic experiences. These parts are often suppressed or isolated within the psyche because their intense feelings of fear, shame, or pain are overwhelming. The individual may unconsciously push these exiles away to function in daily life, creating a sense of disconnection from the traumatic events. For survivors of abuse, exiles carry the unmet needs and vulnerabilities that were present during the abusive experiences. They embody the raw emotions and are often frozen in time, still reacting as if the abuse is ongoing. This can lead to unrecognizable body sensations, chronic pain, chronic fatigue, lethargy, anhedonia, feelings of worthlessness, helplessness, and persistent emotional pain that linger beneath the surface. To manage the overwhelming emotions held by exiles, the human psyche develops protectors. These parts act as guardians, employing strategies to prevent the exile's painful feelings from flooding into consciousness. Protectors can manifest in various forms, such as inner critics, perfectionists, or behaviors like substance abuse, risk-taking behaviors, and self-harming. Protectors serve two primary functions. One function or role is the proactive manager. Managers are parts that strive to keep the individual in control by organizing life in ways that minimize the risk of the exile's pain resurfacing. They may enforce strict rules, promote high achievement, or encourage avoidance of triggering situations. Another function or role is the reactive firefighter. Firefighters are the parts that emerge when exiles break through despite the manager's efforts. Firefighters engage in urgent actions to numb or escape the intense emotions, often through impulsive or self-destructive behaviors. The interplay between exiles and protectors creates a cycle that can perpetuate internal conflict and hinder healing. Protectors, while aiming to shield the individual, may employ methods that are ultimately harmful or counterproductive. For example, substance abuse may temporarily numb emotional pain, but can lead to additional problems and reinforce feelings of shame or guilt. This internal struggle can leave survivors feeling fragmented and disconnected from themselves. The exile's suppressed pain continues to influence thoughts and behaviors indirectly, while the protector's efforts to contain that pain can limit personal growth and relationships. IFS therapy seeks to address this complex and conflicted internal system by fostering a compassionate relationship between the individual's core self and their various parts. The self is considered the true essence of the person, characterized by qualities like calmness, curiosity, compassion, and confidence. The therapeutic process in IFS involves the following steps. The first step is accessing the self, helping the individual connect with their core self to provide a stable and compassionate internal presence. The next step involves understanding the protectors, engaging with protector parts, and expressing gratitude toward them to appreciate their roles and positive intent. Therapists guide individuals to acknowledge these parts without judgment, recognizing them as attempts to cope with pain. The next step is healing exiles. Once protectors feel understood and are willing to allow access to the exiles, the individual can begin to address the repressed traumatic memories and emotions. Through compassionate witnessing, retrieving the exile from the past, reparenting the exile, and processing the powerful pain and emotions, exiles can release their burdens. The next step is integration. As the exiles heal, their intense emotions lessen, reducing the need for extreme protective actions or behaviors. The final step to IFS is reassignment and reintegration. All the parts can adopt healthier roles, leading to a more harmonious internal system. There is a staggering economic cost of abuse to our society. Estimating the total annual cost to the U.S. economy from all types of abuse is complex due to the diversity of abuses and overlapping costs. However, combined estimates suggest that the economic impact amounts to hundreds of billions, potentially exceeding $1 trillion annually. Here are some breakdowns by category. If we are considering substance abuse as a correlated problem with abuse survivors, the cost is over $740 billion annually. According to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, this figure includes costs related to crime, lost work productivity, and healthcare expenses associated with the use of tobacco, alcohol, and illicit drugs. The cost from child abuse and neglect is approximately $124 billion in lifetime economic burdens for cases identified in a single year. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported this figure based on new cases from 2008, accounting for health care, child welfare, criminal justice, and lost productivity costs. That cost has obviously not been adjusted for inflation, so it is most likely much more. The cost of intimate partner violence or domestic violence exceeds $8.3 billion per year. The CDC estimates include medical care, mental health services, and lost productivity due to intimate partner violence. The cost of sexual violence is more than $122 billion annually. The National Sexual Violence Resource Center reports costs related to medical services, lost productivity, criminal justice activities, and other associated expenses. The cost of elder abuse is at least $2.9 billion annually. Financial exploitation and abuse of older adults contribute to significant economic losses, as reported by the MetLife Mature Market Institute. Summing these categories suggests an annual economic impact that potentially exceeds $1 trillion. This estimate is conservative, as it doesn't fully account for a number of other factors. Costs related to harassment and discrimination, which can lead to decreased productivity and increased turnover. Beyond elder abuse, broader financial fraud and scams contribute additional substantial losses. Indirect costs, including long-term psychological impacts, reduced quality of life, and intergenerational effects that are difficult to quantify. Please note, these figures may have overlaps due to intersecting categories, for example, substance abuse, contributing to domestic violence, and different studies may use varying methodologies. Therefore, while the total provides a rough approximation, it underscores the significant economic burden abuse places on society. The information on the cost of abuse was gathered from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, the MetLife Mature Market Institute, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. Understanding these costs highlights the importance of prevention and intervention strategies to reduce abuse and mitigate its economic and human toll on society. Surviving abuse is a profound challenge that reshapes an individual's internal world. The formation of exiles and protectors is a natural response to overwhelming trauma. Internal family systems therapy offers a path toward healing by embracing all parts of the self with compassion and understanding. By acknowledging and integrating these parts, survivors can move toward wholeness, reclaiming their lives from the shadows of the past. That concludes this video. As we move forward in our sessions, there will be opportunities for you to map your parts. You and I can discuss this in your therapy sessions, providing a safe space to explore these aspects of yourself. If you are not working with me in therapy or coaching, I encourage you to find a qualified professional mental health care provider to speak with. I invite you to reflect on any other experiences not mentioned here that may have helped form an exile or burden an exiled part of you. Sharing these experiences can improve the program for you and others, and your identity will remain anonymous and confidential. I hope you were able to engage with this lesson safely. Remember, if at any time you feel anxious, depressed, angry, afraid, triggered, dissociated, overstimulated, or overwhelmed, please pause watching the video. You can reach out to me through a message in the client account portal, or you may wish to complete the meditation titled Soothing a Triggered Exile. If the Soothing Exiles meditation isn't available, please let me know and I'll share it with you. Also, I would also like to let you know, if you do not feel safe at home, around another person, or at work, if you are the ongoing victim of any type of abuse, I am sincerely asking you to say something to someone and reach out for help. If you are not safe around yourself and or are experiencing a mental health crisis, please seek immediate mental health care and treatment from crisis services in your area. In the next several videos in this series, we will explore and review more exiled parts, their experiences, and their protective parts. In future videos, I will examine and review the protective parts of our systems, their roles, their burdens, and their emotions, perceptions, beliefs, and thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, if you learned something new, if you found this video helpful and informative, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you get all the new content coming out daily. Thank you for your courage and willingness to explore these difficult topics, get to know these vulnerable parts of yourself, and choosing to make difficult changes in your life.